We've been seeing a change in how we build workflows for businesses. And I just wanted to talk about what this means for small businesses, if you own a small business or you're a solopreneur, or maybe you have an even bigger business or you're a VP or director or something in a larger business. This is going to be relevant as well. The main way that we would do automations even a few months ago was building out little things like an n8n, make.com, Zapier, that sort of thing. And of course, you could code them as well. So I'll give a little background on what historically we would do and what was relevant a few months ago and where it's sort of shifting towards. And you're welcome to drop any questions that you have in the chat. And I'll be happy to answer them if you have any specific like use cases that you might have that you're wondering if any of this makes sense for you. I can help explain sort of how it works. It- a few years ago, even like a couple of years ago, when a company needed to move data from one system to the other, we would typically build out a workflow. So we would use something like Zapier. That is a no code type of platform where you could say, hey, I have this Shopify and I have this CRM and I want to move the data from A to B. And in those scenarios, before you would use something like Zapier, you would connect both of them. You would just log into both of them. The systems would be connected. And then from there, you would be able to say when a transaction happens over here in Shopify or in WooCommerce, that data can be moved over to your CRM, HubSpot, Monday, whatever it is. And then you could also do things like connect Stripe, for example. So a lot of things that we did were connect things like Stripe to QuickBooks, to a CRM, to another platform, because people were finding themselves doing things repeatedly. They just had to go in and they had to download invoices, download receipts, put them all in a folder, organize them, and then someone else might have to go into another system, upload these, or maybe even put them in a spreadsheet manually. And it was a lot of work. So workflows allowed us to make that more efficient, easier to manage, and you didn't have to have a person actually doing these things. So it's not so much taking a person's activities, but rather moving the needle in what that person has to do. So that person can now have 1 more hour to do other things that might be different than just copying and pasting and moving files around. That is a win for the company most of the time. So what we would do is, again, we would use Zapier, we would use make.com, we would use n8n, which is fantastic, by the way, to create these connections between different systems and create automations so that maybe whenever the invoice happens, whenever the payment happens, something gets triggered, something else happens downstream. So a typical thing would be maybe I want to get notified when an order comes in so I can follow up with the client. Maybe my system doesn't support it. So you would build something in n8n that just receives a trigger from Stripe or from Blog, Square, whatever you're using. And then from that, it would send you a WhatsApp message or an SMS telling you this person just paid for their invoice. Now you can follow up, and then you could go in and follow up or do whatever. Or it could move the data from one system to the other. It could do the merging of the data. Maybe you have certain things like the person's email, the person's name, and all the amounts, etc. here, but then you have a spreadsheet with all the rest of the company information and their account and their balance and all that over in another system. But then you want to have it reported in your main system, and it's all messy, and you have to have people doing it manually. So again, what we would do is we would use these tools to sort of connect, to use them as a glue to connect everything and allow them to just get the data already sort of sorted, filtered, organized, and delivered. And I say we used to do that because the way LLMs have been changing, it's now more of a conversational kind of thing that's not locked in the sense that something breaks and it just breaks and you have to go and get someone who understands this to actually go and fix it. So before, again, let's say we have a workflow, and we still have many of them. By the way, it's not like they went away, but let's say you have a workflow and something comes in from that system, like say Stripe or something. Maybe they changed something in the way it works. It comes in, it's going through all your flow, maybe it's 7 steps in. Suddenly, they change the way the objects are sent, and you didn't account for that in your flow. What happens? It breaks, gives you an error message. Or if you had error checking, conditionals, etc., then yeah, maybe it'll let you know. Now you or your developer or whoever you contracted to get this done for you, we have to go in, see what the issue is, figure it out, go through and manually inspect it, maybe stop the flow for a little bit, adjust it, test it. Now that it works, turn it back on. And that could happen any number of times. Maybe it never happens, but maybe it happens once a year, twice a year, etc. So still, that flow is really helpful and it saves you a lot of time. So they're still great. However, people have started interacting with ChatGPT, with Claude, with Gemini in their day-to-day lives. They're just talking to these tools to get help with conversions, to get help with, I don't know, I need to know what, I don't know, maybe use it for research, maybe use it for calculations, maybe use it for coding. There's many reasons that you might use an LLM. And they're all great, but everything is sort of in that chat. So what happens is I've seen a lot of people start to see the benefits of using something like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, and maybe dump in their files. So I was giving the invoices example earlier, and maybe a small business owner or an accountant at a small business is used to downloading all these files, all these invoices, and creating a spreadsheet and putting in all the balances and then getting all the bank statements and doing the reconciling. And they had to do it manually. And now they figured out that within ChatGPT or Claude, they could just drag in the PDFs. So they could say, hey, I have these 5 or 10 or 12 PDFs. I have this monthly statements from the bank. Here you go. Please generate a spreadsheet for me that will have all the information that I need. I need to have all the rows with the dates, with the amounts, with the balances, etc. And then I need another tab that matches this column with this column, this payment with this account, this other spreadsheet with the customer information, etc. So people have started figuring out that you can use these tools, again, in the chat, just a regular version, nothing fancy, of ChatGPT, of Claude, of Gemini in their browser or in the app or on their phone, and it outputs the whole thing. It outputs the whole report that they needed. They can check it and things like that, and it works great. However, many have found that as you do that a lot, now that you've sort of trained it to do that, that conversation is gold. You are excited because it works, but you've used it for months and now it's starting to do some strange things. Maybe you find that it doesn't continue the full thing. Maybe it just seems a little less intelligent than it did before, but it was that golden conversation that you had. So what's going on? What happens a lot of times is that the context window gets used up. And a context window in the scope of an LLM is like its memory. It's what it can support in a conversation turn. The way LLMs work is that they can be very good at answering your questions or keeping that conversation going. But every turn, every message that you send is actually sending that whole conversation back and forth. So it starts to fill up, and they have a limit. And some might be 100,000. 200,000 tokens, 1,000,000 tokens. If you're using some of the recent ones, especially Opus now has that 1,000,000 token. I don't know for how long, but it's there. And that just means that it can hold that amount of memory, if you think about it, in that conversation. And what happens is when you get close to that limit, there's two options. Either it will start forgetting the past, or it will have to compact the conversation, sort of compress it, do a summary of the conversation. And so maybe now you're using 20% and you have the rest to talk to it. So you continue. And that's why sometimes it can feel a little less intelligent than before, even if you had this great conversation with it, that you've been doing something very specific with it through time and you've sort of trained it to work that way. I know this is not actual training, but you've sort of interacted with it enough that it now understands what you mean whenever you drop in a PDF. So that's great. It works great. But then how do you get around that? Well, you could create a new conversation, of course, but then you have to tell it all over again. Well, remember how we were talking in this other conversation about how I give you files and then you output a spreadsheet and then it sort of gets it and then you start again? Well, that's not very useful, right? So that's where things like skills come along. And skills are super useful because a skill is a set of instructions written in Markdown with just text with some formatting that's legible for the LLMs, but it's also human readable. You can create a skill for anything. So if you've already had this conversation where you've explained the types of files that you will provide, like invoices or bank statements, etc., and you've given it some examples, and it's done some of the output, and the output is perfect, you can then tell it, please create a skill that does exactly what we've been doing in this conversation. Ask me any questions you have about that. So if you do that simple thing, what will happen is a tool, if you're using Claude, for example, will use its skill builder to create a skill for it. And that means it will create that file that I mentioned. It'll write everything that it needs right there. It'll analyze it. It'll write it down as instructions that it can then use later on in a blank conversation. So this is super helpful because now if you install that skill, or if you give it to anyone else for that matter, you can share these, by the way. If you do that, what happens is you can now open a blank conversation with empty context. So you have the full context to use. And then you can just say, use the invoice to spreadsheet skill to read these invoices that I'm going to give you and output a spreadsheet. Or you could just tell it to use the skill. That's it. So it'll know what it's supposed to do. And then you just drop in the files and it'll do exactly what it was supposed to do from the start with a full context. So you can have all these new conversations for that. So if you don't want to write every day or whatever, you just do it. You can use the skill. Now imagine you can actually do that for anything. So if you do that for your invoices, then you might want to do it for your bank statements to create a report. You might want to do it for consolidation. You might want to do it for reconciling. You might want to do it for, I don't know, reviewing some emails, checking if you're missing any support tickets. You can do it for checking inventory. Maybe you're wanting a report of inventory and how the product is selling and how much movement you need, and you need to do projections. You're constantly doing it. So any task that you're sort of constantly doing, you can now automate just conversationally with Claude, Gemini, OpenAI, ChatGPT. And it's super useful because, like I said at the beginning of this conversation, we used to do this exclusively using workflows. So before we would use workflows, and the workflows would have to be manually built. So you would use n8n or Zapier or something like that, and someone would have to go in and create the workflow specific for that process. And it takes time, and a lot of times you would need to hire someone to build that for you if you don't have anyone on your team that does this sort of thing. So it was fine and it's still fine and you still hire someone to do it. But every time something breaks, you have to go in and adjust manually. Now that I'm talking about skills, just directly in the chat, skills are super powerful because they are malleable. What does that mean? It means that you can create these skills that I'm talking about, like the invoice to spreadsheet creator, the reconciling one, the inventory tracker, etc. Whatever thing you're doing in your business, task you're doing in your business, you can interact with your ChatGPT or Claude and have it help you do that process. But then once you've done it a few times, you can tell it to create a skill for it. The next time you want to do it, just open a new conversation. You say, use this skill and let's get to work. And it could just go in and get to work. So it's very useful. And you can share them. So you can share them with your team. And then your team can also use them. It's not just logged into like your chat. They're not related to the chat itself. It's just a skill. It's a file. You can put it on GitHub. You can share it with the world if you want. You can keep it private, whatever you want. Skills, I really like because they are malleable. I mentioned this before. What does that mean? It means that if you're using the skill and it's working, and then you find something that is not exactly how you want it, maybe it's almost there. It's like, but you need to change this little thing. Instead of having to go and rewire something, you just tell it. You just say, hey, by the way, we also need this other column that adds these two together to get a result. Can you add that? So it'll add it. And then if it works, then you can say, please update the skill so that now it knows to do that. And it will do it. And you can keep track of the versions, whatever you want. But it's very powerful because it's all conversational. You're just chatting with it. So the same way you would use it, you also help it get better. And sometimes you can have it help itself get better. And we can have another conversation about that. But just for the sheer point of having a way to talk to the thing, have it help you the way you're probably already doing with your ChatGPT, and then say, now that you've helped me do this, create a skill to then do it later on many times easier, it'll do it. And now you can go in and use it anytime you want. You can share it, and then you can also make it fix itself when it needs an adjustment because something changed or because you want to add new features, etc. So you can have all your little separate skills. And so, by the way, I'm running a very good example of this where we have this process of creating many files, many documents for training. This is for a training program. And so it'll generate questions, quiz questions. It's based on a big corpus of data in a specific industry. And so one of the steps we need is to go and to get details from the existing knowledge base. So maybe we have a skill that goes and fetches the details. And we have another skill that generates questions. And we have another skill that, based on those questions, generates answers, multiple choice or multiple selectors. And then another one that goes through all of the ones that were generated, and then it might check them for repeatability. How much is there a lot of redundancy? So there might be a skill that does that separately on its own. And there might be another one that then compares these against previous versions that we made, etc. So you have all these skills. And then you can have a workspace where you can say, this is a process that I want to follow. So every time I give you this type of input, like I'm going to just drop you in a folder with all my invoices for the year or for the month, and I'm going to drop in the bank statements, and I'm going to drop in this other thing. Please do workflow XYZ. In workflow XYZ, there might be a file or a skill that actually runs 5 other skills sequentially. So you just have to tell it, go forth and do XYZ, and it'll know to do first the first thing, then the second thing, then the third thing, then the fourth thing. And that's amazing because you don't have to explain each step, which is likely what you're doing right now if you're using ChatGPT or Claude or anything like that for your business or for whatever you're using it for. And so it opens up a lot of possibilities because, for one, you get, like I was talking about earlier, all this larger context window because you don't have to keep a full conversation just to have it realize how you've done it before or in the past. Now you open a new conversation and you can just start working with it. So you can have as many of these as you want. Secondly, like I was saying before, it's malleable. You can just tell it to add things, to make it more robust, to fix some issues, to make it more secure against attacks, which is another conversation that we have to have as well. So all that's really good, but then maybe it's something that you just do every day. And why even go in and do it? So that's the next phase. Like you can go in now into ChatGPT. They have their Codex app. If you go to Cloud, you go to the Cloud app. They have the co-work feature. You can now tell it to use those skills every day or on a schedule. You can say, I want you to run this every day at 7 a.m. automatically. And you can fetch the files from this Google Drive folder, or you can go and check this email, get the files from there, or connect to this other system. Here's an MCP. This is a way you connect to the system, to your Stripe or to your QuickBooks or whatever. Get the data you need, process it, massage it, organize it, and then push this other thing over to this other system. So now you can do all that just chatting with it. And you can have it actually schedule these out and go and do them. So if you've heard anything in the news and the media about OpenClaw and how this is such a huge thing because it can do things on its own, yeah, you can use OpenClaw. It's great. I use it for some things. We have it locked down and it's very specific for specific types of project, but then we bring in sort of the big guns for other stuff. But it's really useful just for the fact that you just chat with it. And I think it opens up our eyes to what's possible if you have it in the palm of your hand. So now all these providers like OpenAI and Anthropic have listened and started adding their own versions of like the mobile version where you can chat with it and have it these conversations, sort of take your session along with you and continue on the road because they process on the cloud. GitHub has that and Copilot as well. So when before you had to turn to someone to build all these for you and keep them in check, and there had to be a pause or stop to be able to continue when something failed. Again, it comes back to the actual user. You can now just run a conversation and ask it what the issue was, and it'll fix itself, or you can guide it to fix itself. So I'm seeing that, and many people are seeing this, not just me, but I'm seeing that many of those things that we would previously have done either in code or using n8n can now just be created with skills, because skills, by the way, don't have to just be a markdown file with text. It could also be a collection of scripts, Python scripts, Node scripts, whatever you want. This is getting a little more technical, but you can do that, in which case it can run actual code. It could have a PDF generator. It could have a spreadsheet generator. It could have, I don't know, another layer that pushes data to another place. So it's really powerful. And you don't even have to code anything necessarily. Just ask the thing to code the thing that you need to then do the thing that you need. And yes, of course, you want to understand what it's doing. You don't want to, if you're touching anything with code, you want it to be safe. But sometimes people forget when they're doing the whole narrative about, oh, but if the AI codes it, you don't know what it's doing. Well, you can read it, right? So what the AI codes is just code, which means it's probably well written because the AIs are experts at writing code. Now, there might not be experts in your domain necessarily. And so that's where you come in when you bring your domain knowledge. And if you plan properly and you tell it what to do with a proper plan, it will do it very well. The problem is the ambiguity where we ask it for things and we're not specific enough. That's where issues lie. So if it ever creates any code for you, or you ask an AI to create code for you for a website or a hobby project for something in your business, remember, you can always ask it to explain it. And if you don't trust it, well, if you don't trust it, if you're asked it to build something, you don't trust it, then don't run it, right? But let's say you have ChatGPT build you something and it works, but you're curious. Well, just ask it. In another conversation, you can just ask it, look at this code that I have. It doesn't know that it built the code unless you're in that same conversation, right? So you can then say, please use this. And there's other skills out there as well that are good for security, for UI, for accessibility, etc. And you can just say, please explore all this code base and check it for security concerns, for reusability of code, for accessibility, for best practices, etc. And it can go through and make sure that everything is fine. You can even go to another LLM, and you can do all of these, but you can go to another LLM, another company if you want, and have it go through the code. And it will tell you if there's something wrong with it, if there's a vulnerability or a potential vulnerability, things like that. And yes, there are many professionals that can help you with this as well. But just thinking about like things that you're doing, if you're vibe coding something and then someone comes along and then says, oh, but that's not going to be secure, don't rush to trust them on that. There's ways for you to understand what's actually going on. Maybe it's a simple file. Maybe that file is only like 100 lines long. You can go in and you can have it explain to you exactly line by line what it's actually doing. You'll learn something as well. These tools are very good at explaining the specific items. You can say, explain it to me like you would explain it to a 4-year-old, and it will go and explain it in another non-technical way so that you understand what that particular code is actually doing. So going full circle, I think skills and agents, or the agentic version of how we're interacting with computers now, is going to be the way forward, especially now with more voice coming into play and many other things that are happening in the space. It's much easier to get things done because just chat with these tools. And I do recommend using the skills. And I haven't talked about agents specifically, but you can also have them run sub-agents. And sub-agents are really powerful because then you can have agents or sub-agents that are experts at a specific skill or at a specific domain. So you could have something that you do often, and then you could just say, here you go, run this, spawn sub-agents to do it. And you could do multiple things in parallel. And it could go and have one researching one thing and one doing another thing and one reviewing it and the other one cross-checking it and things like that. And you get a lot more done faster and better at the same time because you can get all these to sort of orchestrate together, which is really neat. You don't want to go overboard. Sometimes and there's research to support this. If you create too many agents, then it becomes messy and there's a lot of overhead, and that is not necessary. But in some scenarios, instead of just having your main ChatGPT or whatever screen talking to it, if you can use agents or sub-agents, you have this possibility of continuing the conversation with the main agent while other agents are working on specific parts of the problem, bringing the data back in, and then you can work with it. So very useful. We've found ourselves transforming a lot of the flows that we used to have in n8n, Make.com, and Zapier into actual skills-based tooling because it's repeatable, it's usable, it's accessible to the business. I am of the opinion that if you can help a business and then you can pass on your knowledge to that business such that they can proceed even if you're not there, that's amazing. Some people say like, why would you do that? It doesn't make sense revenue wise. Well, yeah, of course, you can still have a consulting arrangement if you want, but you can help a business and help them grow in that same way. Because if you think about it, a lot of people then get scared and say, well, if I'm an agency and I get hired to do this, but then I show them how, they won't need me anymore. And while that might be true on the surface, if they figure out that this is so valuable for them that they could just hire someone internally and train them through time, they're going to do that anyway and then just get rid of you completely. But if you help transfer some of that knowledge into their team and then help even onboard that person on their team such that they can grow and do all the maybe, I don't know, low to medium complexity things on their own, then great, because they'll grow tremendously. And if they grow tremendously, then they'll have more budget, more resources to then invest in higher complexity features. And that's when they're going to come to you as the expert to say, hey, we are trying to do this bigger thing. Can you help us? And then you could do that consulting arrangement of helping them organize their thoughts and helping set everything up. And then their team can implement. It becomes more of a symbiotic type relationship than just a third party contractor that they just hire and then might just let go whenever they find something better. That's just my opinion in that sense. But if you're using ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, anything, and you feel that it's doing a good job, but sometimes the context window affects you. Maybe you don't know it's the context window, but I explained it earlier, so you can rewatch this video. But you find that sometimes it works great, and sometimes it sort of decreases its intelligence. A lot of times that's just the context window. And so if you can create skills, and remember, you can just ask it to create a skill on what you've already figured out how to do, then you just open any old new conversation and use that skill within that conversation, and it will help you keep it focused on what it's supposed to do and get a lot more accurate results. Now, if you want to take it a little further, look at Cowork from Claude, look at Codex, the application as well from OpenAI, because if you work there, you have the benefit of working with actual files within your system, which can also be pushed to GitHub or any other code repository. And that way, you will have way more control over what it can do, over the files that it's touching, and it doesn't have to keep everything in context at all times. It could just store files that it could then read to use when they need them and adjust files when it needs to and generate outputs and store them without hallucinating as much as if you just have a huge conversation that just has everything. So that's what I'm sharing today. I hope it helps you. And if it did, appreciate a like, a share, whatever, so that other people can see this type of content. And any questions that you have whenever I'm streaming or even after I'm streaming, please drop it in the chat and I'll be happy to answer them as well. Thanks, everyone. See you in the next one.